What's going on, everybody? Happy MLK Day, aka Martin Luther King Day. I am Brian, and I am the originator of the blog Brian Speaks On, which can be seen on YouTube and on Facebook under the same name. And I'm making this video today, and it's a bittersweet thing for me to make. One, I want to celebrate MLK Day with everybody, and that goes beyond any race, creed, gender, age, category, because that's what Martin Luther King was all about, in my estimation. He was about equality for us all, wasn't just strictly black people, and I commend and respect his efforts, everything that he did. The real purpose of me making this video today, though, isn't about MLK and about Martin Luther King Day, although I can't make this video without acknowledging MLK, because it goes to the essence of what I want to talk about today. And the topic that I want to speak about is there was a children's book that was written at least it was released about a couple of weeks ago here in the country, and it was a children's book, and it was written by two black authors. The book told the story of George Washington's slave, who was a cook for George Washington, and the story is about the slave and his daughter being so happy to make a cake for George Washington on George Washington's birthday. And I guess the attempt was to kind of like create some type of harmonic story about, race relations back in George Washington's era of being alive in America and basically owning slaves. Needless to say, that idea was gravely just ill and far-fetched and ill-suited for today's times, especially. And subsequently, the publisher Scholastic, of all people, had to pull the book. Now, I don't want to get on Scholastic specifically, although they do deserve a jeer too, but when you have a book written by black people about something that deals with blacks in a certain time period era, I would kind of think that the publisher might actually think that they probably wrote it in a particular kind of context that should be acceptable. So I don't want to give them a pass, but at the same time, I do want to think that that was probably the mindset. But anyway, my distaste and my disgust is really geared toward the authors, who, again, I mentioned are black. First of all, the story is just, it just speaks to a certain internalized coonery, and yeah, I know that's a strong word, and I don't know these authors to be calling them out as coons and stuff like that, but at the same time, that kind of a story is what we don't need anymore. First of all, it's not even an accurate story, although the premise is based in fact. The slave that was being spoken about in the story was an actual slave of George Washington and was an actual cook, and George Washington actually did think highly of his slave. See, now this is where you can't separate reality from a story. George Washington may have liked this person, he may have thought highly of him. This man was his slave, regardless of what he thought of him and how highly he thought of him. He was still a slave. And the whole embellishment of that basic fact is just, I just find it disheartening and just crazy for a black person to write like that. Secondly, when you learned the real story of this particular slave, whose name was Hercules, you would learn that in actuality, in reality, this slave actually escaped slavery from George Washington on that very day that they're speaking of him making this food and this dinner or this cake or whatever he made for George Washington that day. The real story was that he actually escaped his slavery and lived the rest of his life a free man. Now, why was that story not the story that should have been told? And this goes into the more broad point that I want to make. This is just a microcosm of what we as black people in certain situations, not all of us, but the people like this who tell these types of stories, you're still trying to gain a particular kind of validation by writing stories and telling stories like this that are just basically pandering to the comfort level of white people. And I hate to just go straight to white people with this, but when you write a story trying to basically sentimentalize a relationship between a slave and a slave owner, yeah, that speaks to a particular kind of coonery and a pandering to try to gain some type of recognition and validation from these people, you know. And I when I say these people, I don't mean all white people, okay? I mean those white people that statement applies to. Just like all black people don't represent a certain thing, all white people don't represent a certain thing. I get that. But again, my thing is not, I'm not even sweating the white people on this. I'm sweating the black people who wrote this book and black people who do things like this. We keep trying to tell our story in a certain way to make it comfortable for non-black people, instead of telling the true, straight up, factual history of what was going on, you know. And again, slavery wasn't fun, you know, and I don't care what you say about slave owners being sympathetic to the plight of the slave. It didn't stop them from owning, using, abusing slaves from the time that they're born to the time that they died. It didn't stop them from breeding slaves with each other to create more slaves so that they could continue to work that the slaves that previously died or could no longer do. Then it doesn't sugarcoat the reality, you know. And you don't help. You're not helping by continuing to embellish, to make these embellishments of stories. It's bad enough that Hollywood does it. It's bad enough that Hollywood steals black culture and you know, typecast black people, and only in certain situations. The only time black people get recognized as being great actors and actresses is when they're playing maids, butlers, and slaves. But other than that, you don't get an Academy Award nomination, apparently, as shown by these last couple of years of Academy Awards and Oscars and stuff like that. But later for that too, you know. Again, it's already being done to us. You're not helping by perpetuating the problem even further. You know, instead of telling the real stories. And again, why are you telling stories about slavery anyway? You know, everybody keeps doing this as if the narrative of us begins with chattel slavery in America. You know, we have been proven to be the original people of this earth. You know, why are you not writing about things, stories of glory, stories of inspiration of black people, African and otherwise, from all over this world? But yet you want to talk about the house field, you know, the happy house niggas of the original White House of George Washington, and how happy they were to bake this cake. And again, it's not even a factual story. I know it's a children's story, but if it's based in fact, tell the real story. You know, talk about how happy he was when he escaped his servitude, his slavery. You don't want to talk about that though. Why? But again, I mean, we have to, as people, stop looking for love from outside sources. You know, shout out to Jada Pinkett today. I saw a video that she made, and even though her video was based on the Academy Awards thing and the lack of black people in it, it still spoke to a broader narrative, and I appreciate her for speaking out on it and saying basically that if we as a people, as a culture, loved ourselves the way that we sought love from others, then we would attain the power that we so desperately want to have as a culture. But again, you're looking for love from outside sources. And sometimes you're looking for love from people that have almost the opposite feelings towards you. People whose better interests is to keep you in a place of inferiority rather than equality. Because when you start speaking of being equal and having equality and being included, they want to throw certain phrases out there like reverse racism. How can you reverse racism if the intention is basically to even the playing field? That's not reversing racism. That's balancing things out. But see, these are the kind of propagandized tricks that gets played psychologically with us. You know, we're still seeking the inclusion. We're still seeking the validation when these people are no better than you. They're no better than you. You know, you don't need their validation. You validate you. You know, and again, for me, it's such a distasteful thing to see one of our own write a book that is just it just has that, it reeks of coonery. You know, it's crazy. And in this year of 2016, we still have to defend our children from being taught madness like this sugar-coated, embellished foolishness. We have to watch out and filter through all of our children's reading material to make sure that they're not reading stuff that's just completely miseducating them and giving them a false perspective of how things work, where they come from, who they are. But it's so necessary that we continue to be vigilant in paying attention to these things. And I commend the people that saw this book and blew it up and made sure that it got taken off the shelves. I commend people who stay vigilant on top of their children's education, and I commend people who speak up and speak out, unafraid of what they're going to be labeled, because you're going to be labeled. You know, that's the trick. That's what they want. They want you to speak out so they can label you a certain way, so people can consider you in a certain aspect. But you know what? We have to just continue to do what we do, you know? And we need to start doing us. And when I say doing us, you know, I'm not saying that to be a separatist. I'm not saying that to be a militant. I'm saying that to be pro-black, to be someone who loves who he is and loves his people and wants us to ascend in a world and in a society that is structured to prevent that, or at the very least stagnate it. You know, shout out to everybody that's paying attention out there and who aren't afraid to speak up and tell the real story, not embellish things to gain some type of brownie points. And that's basically it. I wish us all well. I wish us all equal and fair opportunity. May we one day actually reach that goal, because Martin wasn't the only person that had that dream. Later.